Alright guys, in this video we're going to look at the last of the SOL review points, the PowerPoints, the one having to do with standards 11 to 13. So this is going to be on the Americans, the rise of nations in the late Middle Ages, and the Renaissance. Here we go. Alright, Western Hemisphere civilizations, this is standard 11. Identify the provided civilization, that is the Mayans. Alright, the name of the region there is the Yucatan Peninsula. And the general topography of the Mayan region is going to be mountainous in the south and rainforest in the north. So we've got mountains down here near Guatemala and rainforest up on the end of the Yucatan Peninsula. And identify how the Mayan region was politically organized. It was independent city-states, and who ruled over each city-state was a god-king. Okay, usually dynastic. And then which city represents the Mayan civilization and culture best? And that's Chichen Itza. So the thing to remember about the Mayans is they have city-states, and that's very similar to the Greeks with their city-states. And part of the reason, guys, would be to remember that in a rainforest or in high mountain areas, there's only going to be small areas or pockets where you can actually farm. Alright, Mayan economy is based on trade and agriculture. The Mayans are going to construct pyramids with temples on top as a location for worship. The Mayans themselves were polytheistic. Alright, and the civilization in this picture, a little bit farther up into Mexico, is the Aztec civilization. And their capital was constructed upon Lake Texcoco. The general topography of the Aztec region is an arid valley. Arid meaning dry and hot. Dry meaning not a whole lot of rainfall. Keep that in mind. Okay, the Aztec region was politically organized as one large empire, and the empire was ruled by an emperor. And the city that represents the Aztec empire was Tenochtitlan. Aztec economy was based on agriculture and tribute from conquered civilizations. And the Aztecs adapted to their surrounding and developed an agriculture technique known as floating gardens, or chinampas. Sacrifice and religious rituals performed on what type of structure? The Aztecs also built pyramids where they performed their sacrifices. And the Aztecs were polytheistic. And then our last Western Hemisphere civilization that you guys need to know, we move to South America, and this is the Incans. Okay, the Incans are located in the Andes Mountains, and this is, as we said, in South America, present-day Chile and Peru. Alright, the Incan region was politically organized as an empire with one emperor, and the Incans were ruled by an emperor, as I said. Descendant of Inti. Which city represents the Incan Empire best? And that is the city of Machu Picchu. The Incan economy was based on high-altitude agriculture, and to get their high-altitude agriculture, remember the Incans had to cut terraces into the side of mountains. Alright, so keep in mind with other cultures we've talked about not being able to grow food successfully in high altitude or on the sides of mountains. The Incans solved this problem by cutting terraces. The Incans follow a polytheistic religion, and the Incans' greatest public works project was their road system that spans the Andes Mountains. And the three most important achievements of the Mayan, Aztec, and Incan civilizations is they all create their own calendars, their own math systems, and their own version for writing and record keeping, all independently and without interaction with each other, or with minimal interaction with each other. And that's Standard 11. Moving on to Standard 12, Late Medieval Period. Who led the Norman conquest and united most of England under his rule? That is William the Conqueror. And the decisive battle in the Norman conquest is the Battle of Hastings. Common law is unified law based upon and enforced by precedent, judgment, and decree of courts. And which monarch was responsible for this reform? This was Henry II in England. Okay, the significance of the Magna Carta is that it limited the powers of the king when King John signed it in 1217. As I said, King John. And then Parliament grew in power due to the king's need for taxes and council. Which two nations were involved in the 100 Years' War? The answer there is England and France. And a military leader proved to be a unifying force for France was Joan of Arc. And the major impact of the Hundred Years' War was it defined England and France as nations. We started to see a rise of nationalism in the two countries. The individual who was the founder of the Capetian dynasty and established the French capital in Paris is Hugh Capet. And the contribution of this dynasty to the French nation was it expanded control over most of modern-day France. As you can see there in the map, you have Paris, Reims, Lyon, and they almost get out to Bordeaux. But you'll see that they have the majority of modern-day France. Which pair of Spanish monarchs ended the Reconquista, initiated the Spanish Inquisition, and expelled the Jews and Moors, and unified Spain? That is Ferdinand and Isabella. The Spanish monarch that expanded the Spanish Empire into the Western Hemisphere was Charles V. Which Russian leader overthrew Mongol rule and expanded the Russian nation? That would be Ivan the Great. And the title that was assumed by his successors was Tsar. You'll see it spelled either way. Ivan the Great centralized power within the city of Moscow. And the religion with influence into the unification of the Russian state, as we remember from previous units, is the Eastern Orthodox religion, which has its Greek influences. The goal of the Crusades was to liberate the city of Jerusalem. The Pope whose speech called for this holy war was Urban II. The political territories that were established in the Holy Land in Asia Minor after the First Crusade were known as Crusader states. And then the Muslim leader that would eventually recapture the city of Jerusalem after the Second Crusade was Saladin. And then during the Fourth Crusade, Constantinople was sacked by Crusaders. Identify whether the following groups or individuals were strengthened or weakened by the Crusades: nobles, monarchs, and popes. Alright, nobles were going to be weakened. If you guys remember, the feudal system was reliant on the labor, near slave level labor of serfs, and all of our serfs are taking up the crusade and leaving, so we're going to have nobles weakened in the feudal system. Monarchs are going to be strengthened because people are going to come back and be loyal to their country, which is going to lead to a rise in nationalism, and the Pope is going to be weakened, as he is the one who's called for these unsuccessful crusades. The economic effects of the Crusades are we're going to have a stimulation of trade between the Middle East and the Mediterranean. Crusaders are going from Europe, and they are going to the Middle East, we're being exposed to all these wonderful Middle East goods that we see along these trade routes, and when they return to Europe, their desire for these goods remains, so they start seeking ways to get it, which will start spurring trade along the Mediterranean. True or false, the Crusades left a lasting legacy of bitterness among Christians, Jews, and Muslims. That is true. And then the empire that was weakened by the Crusades was the Byzantine Empire, obviously with Constantinople being sacked. The civilization destroyed cities and countryside as they invaded Russia, China, Central and Southwestern Asia was the Mongols. The founder of the Mongolian Empire was Genghis Khan. And who conquered and turned Constantinople into their capital in 1453? That would be the Ottoman Turks. And that marks the official end of the Byzantine Empire almost 1,000 years after it was established. What other name is the Black Death known by? The Black Death is known as the bubonic plague. The impact of the Black Death was a decline in population. About a third of Europe's population died in a 4-year span. We have a scarcity of labor. Most of the people who are dying with the bubonic plague are the poor, the serfs, those living amongst the trash where rats can get to them, which is going to cause labor to go. Towns are going to be freed from feudal obligations as they no longer have the labor to provide them. We have a decline in church influence as prayers are going unanswered, and we have the disruption of trade throughout the region. What group was among the very few who could read or write during the Middle Ages? That was the clergy, or church scholars, were the few literates. And then where would the scholastic clergy work? Primarily in monasteries. Church scholars translated Greek and Arabic works into Latin, and the ability for church scholars to make new knowledge available in philosophy, medicine, and science laid the foundations for universities. and that is standard 12. Standard 13, the Renaissance. What event increased the European demand for Middle Eastern goods and stimulated the production of European goods for Middle Eastern markets? Well, we've already talked about this. That is the Crusades. The Crusades are going to fuel that desire, and then the Europeans have to respond by creating goods to create that exchange. The increase in trade brought Europe into frequent contact with which two civilizations? The Byzantine and Muslim empires. And the economic techniques introduced to Europe through contact with the Muslim Empire were the idea of letters of credit, banking, and bookkeeping practices. And the letters of credit are significant because they're going to expand the supply of money and expedite trade. Instead of having to simply have cash, we now have an early version of credit cards. And bookkeeping practice that's important is we have the adoption of Arabic numerals. So we finally go away from Roman numerals and we start using the numbers that we use today. We use Arabic numerals. And a definition for usury is the charging of interest on loans. The Catholic Church had a rule against usury throughout this time period. And the effect that this is going to have on northern Italy is that eventually they're going to secularize. And secularize means to start being more worldly. So northern Italy is a trade hub for all of this trade in the Mediterranean. From northern Italy, it's easy to take it out through up into the rest of Europe. So ships sailing from the Middle East sail across, they land in northern Italy, and then boom, right up in the rest of Europe. So our northern Italian bankers want to charge usury or interest on loans so they can make profit. Well, the church has banned this thing, so what is eventually going to happen is northern Italy is going to start to ignore church directives, and it becomes more secular, more worldly, less religious. And important cities of the Italian Renaissance were Florence, Milan, Genoa, and Venice. As you can see up there in the north. Alright, and these cities benefit from their geographic location, their access to trade routes connecting Europe to the Middle East, obviously, as we've said, with the Mediterranean Sea nearby. And these cities were politically organized as independent city-states that were governed as republics. So they are not part of one large country. They're their own individual little city-states with their own small government. They can set their own tariffs and taxes and trade laws, which allows them to make trade a lot freer and easier through their ports. The author of The Prince was Niccolo Machiavelli, and the basic premise of his book is it's an early modern treatise on government advocating for a strong monarchy. The basic principles are that he supports the absolute power of the ruler, he maintains that the end always justifies the means, and that one should be good if possible, but it is possible or okay to do evil when it is necessary. Alright, compare and contrast medieval and Renaissance art, just so we make sure we're clear. Medieval art has a focus specifically on church and salvation, whereas Renaissance art focuses on individuals and worldly matters, along with a mix and touch of Christianity, but it more glorifies the self. Humanism would be one way of saying it. Alright, identify the artist responsible for the following works. That is going to be Leonardo, Michelangelo with this. Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. Define humanism. Alright, and humanism is the celebration of the individual. We focus on human values and concerns. This is going to stimulate the study of classical Greek and Roman art, literature, and culture as we start to bring that in. Remember, Renaissance means rebirth. We have a rebirth of Greco-Roman culture, art, literature, and values. So with humanism, we are starting to become a little less secular. Alright, and who wrote sonnets, scholarly prose, and is considered the father of humanism, and that is our boy Petrarch. And then humanist artists and scholars are financially supported by patrons who are our wealthy bankers. Now, what aspects increased and aided the spread of Renaissance ideas from northern Italy to northern Europe? The answer there is going to be trade, travel, an increase in literacy, and eventually wealth. How were the ideas of the Northern Renaissance different from the Italian Renaissance? In the Northern Renaissance, there was a stronger focus on Christianity. It was a little more religious, whereas the Italian Renaissance was extremely secular. Who invented the movable type printing press? That is Johann Gutenberg. Gutenberg. And the first publication of this invention is going to be the Holy Bible, Gutenberg Bibles. And the printing press is important, and it will help spread literacy throughout Europe because it's now easier to print books. And specifically, they discover this as a way to print Bibles and make the Bible more accessible to people. Facilitated the dissemination of ideas, and it's going to increase the production and sale of books, as we said. An important invention going forward. The authors of the following works: The Praise of Folly is Erasmus, and then Utopia is written by Sir Thomas More. And that's the end of Standard 13 and the end of our school year.